I wasn't sure whether to call you Brin-Jonathan for full or Brin, so I'm glad you cleared that up. So that works out well.
It was a parental decision, not mine.
That, my friends, is Brin-Jonathan Butler, a freelance writer whose many bylines have appeared in SB Nation Longform, ESPN the Magazine, Harpers, and Esquire. He even spoke with Iron Mike Tyson for Amazon. He's also the author of The Domino Diaries, My Decade Boxing with Olympic Champions, and Chasing Hemingway's Ghost in the Last Days of Castro's Cuba. I'll let you pause so you can wipe your brow. Ready? Alright. Here's what I think you'll come away with the most. 1, Brin is really, really smart. Like, he's playing with napalm and I've got a butane lighter and a can of hairspray. I'm always glad to play the bumbling fool beside a brilliant mind, and Brin is just that. Brilliant. Second, if you're a freelancer who gets super nervous or has a tremendous amount of anxiety and fear, your benevolent host included, then listening to this 90 minutes will light a fire under your ass and get you chasing stories. After I got off the phone with Brin, I about charged through my apartment wall like the Kool-Aid Man. Links and such are in the show notes. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and share it with friends. Also, subscribe to my email list at brendanomero.com so you can stay abreast of hashtag CNF musings, some riffs on freelancing, and other links that I may be working on. Emails ship once a week on Tuesdays at 8 a.m. if and only if I publish something on my website. Small payment for big information. And another thing. Thanks for listening. Here's the notorious BJB. Hit it. I think a lot of us just kind of think on a similar level when it comes to the process and approach, which typically makes for interesting conversations about the craft of narrative journalism. Because there's more like bubbling under the surface than just swooping in and then swooping out to write a report. You know, it's really getting deeply embedded with something. And I think like you and Eva and Joe, Greg Hanlon, and certainly Glenn, everyone there just does such a good job of that. I think that's a testament to just your sensibility as a reporter and a writer.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really interesting with Glenn is I don't think there are many people who are editing in the realm of sports or long-form journalism whose background is so extensive in poetry. So I think that leads him, I think, to curate material almost as much on the basis of sound and language and sort of mood and emotion almost more than the ideas and just the conventional places that you go in this realm. So that's especially for me where I think like I don't have a background in journalism, so I've sort of been finding my way as I go. So that's just been really fortunate for me, and I think almost everybody who works with him, just to again just have a fresh angle on how to approach your stuff. And one of the things that's wonderful with him is he's always trying to find the best material rather than his way of doing it or even your way of doing it. He's looking for the best story in terms of the chemistry between subject and the writers. So he's just been wonderful to work with.
Yeah, and like him, like and Eva, and even Charles Bethea, who I had on in the last episode. What I found that like so many people who are like really, really good at this oftentimes come at it from a non-journalistic background. Like even Charles was he studied poetry. Eva was in history. So it's like they're almost bringing a writer sensibility and then kind of learning the reporting. Like I imagine like that's kind of like your angle. You have like a deeply like literal style, and also I think some of your greatest teachers were a lot of the greatest writers from a lot of the 1920s expats. I feel like I feel their influence in your like pulsating through your prose in a lot of ways. So I wonder like what that's like for you as someone who doesn't have that journalistic background to then come to this style of journalism and then do this kind of storytelling.
Well, you're absolutely right. The first writers that I really delved into were the American greats from the 1920s, and and I guess also the Russians as well, because I mean Hemingway in particular, I think was enormously influenced by Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, and I liked some others that were a little outside of there, like Gogol and some of these other guys. And I mean, Chekhov in particular. I mean, if you just evaluated Chekhov's short stories on the basis of journalism in terms of documenting, a whole generation of all of Russia, I don't think anybody did it more comprehensively than he did, really, at any other time, really. So it's just interesting as a doctor. That's one thing I always find interesting with writers is what did their parents do? What was that household like that they grew up in? What's the orientation of their mind about how they curate stories and material and how they come at material? And I mean, my dad's a lawyer. My mother was a gypsy fortune teller. And I think in some ways that is a bit of my orientation too. I'm looking for something a little strange and unusual. Why would people come to a fortune teller? Because they've kind of exhausted hope in every other area for their problems. And then a lawyer, as most lawyers I know tell me, every time the phone goes off, it's just somebody else's bad news that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
But you're presenting an argument. You're an advocate, and I definitely like to look at people who don't have a voice and sort of turn them into a human being for people in unexpected ways, because surprise is one of the biggest weapons you have as a journalist to affect people emotionally,
Yeah. And I don't know if you've heard interviews with Gay Talese, but like his father had a tailor shop, but like the real sort of breadwinner was his mother's dress shop, which is right next to it or in front of it. And a lot of women came into the dress shop and really just sort of like spilled their guts to Lisa's mother. And through watching his own mother sort of just hear these stories and listen, empathically listen, essentially report without the notebook, it really developed his sensibility of being able to take these stories and tell them in cinematic and empathic ways. And I wonder if your mother being a fortune teller, you absorb some of that, some of her story absorbing sensibility and apply it to your own trade.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I'm very familiar with Talese, and I've interviewed him for some stuff as well. Interesting who the person is on the phone versus on the page as well. There's quite a discrepancy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure. I mean, my mother's house to this day the front door has never been locked, and there's about 10 people a day who walk in who just feel that kind of comfort level with her just to burst in, which wasn't an altogether pleasant thing for me as a kid either, because I didn't know these people, and many of them were quite desperate people, as I say, who've kind of exhausted every other measure of getting counsel for their problems or direction in their life. But I noticed that while I don't necessarily believe in a lot of the same things as my mother, even if you think it's bullshit, it's still, if it is bullshit, how has she been doing it for 33 years, sitting in front of a person one-on-one and offering something of use to these people where they come back again and again and again? And I think a lot of it is just listening to people, empathizing with people, spending a couple hours of preparation to really absorb as much as you can about where they're coming from, how they see the world, how... One of the things I do with every person that I interview is, and I think it's just a base kind of primordial instinct, is how would they most like you to see them? And what are they most trying to keep from you? Mm. Those are very useful places to sort of gaining an understanding of where people are coming from, because most of the time what people hide is a lot more revealing than what they want to reveal. But I like to know both, and it gives me a good idea of the motivation of, like Gay Talese. He's wearing this wonderful outfit to present himself. It's a very big deal for him, presentation, first impressions, and all of that kind of thing. I would do exactly the opposite. I would want people to make an assumption about me that's completely wrong and then surprise them so that we're going to be somewhere new that they didn't expect.
That's real interesting. Yeah, and I've heard Talise speak about that, about he dresses up for out of respect for the people he's with, and also dressing up to the story, as he's wont to say. And that's interesting that like you want to like kind of keep something back and use that element of surprise where it is like, oh shoot, I didn't expect him to say that or come out with that or have that base of knowledge. And like, of what value do you think that element of surprise is for you?
Well, finding somewhere new. Any story that I've done, I've taken subjects who are incredibly well documented most of the time. The kind of people where editors will say, well, what's left to do on that person? And my job is to find something new. I love finding something that people have been staring at their whole life. And it could be an interviewer themselves. I interviewed Errol Morris, who I think most people regard as one of the best interviewers who ever lived. And I wanted to understand why does he have the fixations that he has? Could it be down to some early childhood trauma kind of thing? And the moment we were there, we were someplace new where I could feel the guard was dropping. We were getting less sort of boilerplate answers, because he's got a lot of stock answers. He's incredibly bright. He's incredibly thoughtful, but he's worked through a lot of the problems that I think most interviewers present to him. So I like to just have a conversation where people don't know where it's going, but they feel comfortable sort of riding it out to see where it's going to go. And I think most interviews, I find, are sort of like, I think I opened my book by saying the subject of most interviews is that you can't learn anything about people from an interview. And I think that is the subject of most interviews. So I try to like avoid that if at all possible, and find revealing things. Go places where people have been spending their whole life sort of investigating something, but miss something really glaring, and not confront them with it, but invite them to go further into that. And I think that's I think I've tried to do that with every person I've ever spoken with.
So what is your approach to that? In what way are you able to reach that level of depth that you're after and that essentially everyone else is after? Because they're saying like, well, you can go for it, but I don't know if you're going to get anything. And sure enough, you end up doing exactly what you set out to do. So what is your approach to reaching that level of depth?
I think trying to revisit things from a unique angle. With Mike Tyson, it's, what is he famous for? For being a victimizer. That's what we knew about him. He's gone to prison for rape. He is one of the scariest people ever sort of presented to the culture with what he was doing. But I wondered, maybe it's a complete construct of somebody who imagined this scary person because of what a perennial world-class victim that they were. And when I thought about that, I thought Tyson is sort of confessing and revealing himself over and over and over again with terms that lead to sexual abuse that he'd endured. And what I found was, despite the guy being in the public eye like few people ever in history, he's probably one of the most documented people who's ever lived, and he's been famous since he was 17, 18 years old, so we're talking 30 years now. Nobody had ever asked him if he had experienced sexual abuse at any point. So I read his memoir very closely. Random House sent it to me to review, and in one little throwaway comment, he mentioned that somebody did abduct him and, in his words, attempted to molest him. And then he never returned to it again for the rest of the book. So in the year after that was published, finally I got to him for an interview with Amazon, and nobody had ever even thought to ask him that question about what happened. And I thought it was one of the more revealing things, because if you think of him as a sex abuse victim, it does open him up in a kind of entirely new light. And, I mean, it's difficult to broach that subject. A lot of the reporters I spoke to said, well, the reason why nobody's brought it up is you have to sit across from Mike Tyson after you've asked that question, right, and who knows what he's going to do. So it took some tact to get there, but it's just an example of how in 30 years has nobody thought to ask him that, given that he spent years and years and years before he went to prison for rape in numerous prisons around New York where this kind of thing is notorious for taking place. He was a bullied kid. He was helpless to stand up for himself for most of his lifetime. So I think that's an example of trying to find something new, a way in, and there were clues, but it's just allowing that person then an opportunity to go further into that subject. And the weird thing with that interview is after he did tell me it was true, while I was typing it up the next day, he gave a radio interview the next day and volunteered the information without any prompting. So clearly it was on his mind. And so I wasn't the one to scoop that story in terms of the public's awareness, but I just think it's an example of something really astounding and strange that in 30 years nobody would ask a question that I think was quite a Rosetta Stone into who he was.
Yeah, and it could be a lot of people also maybe just didn't care. They just wanted to talk to the machine who could just knock people out, and they just want to talk about sort of the mundane acts of just pure boxing, which I know if you're really in the sport, it's not mundane. That's not what I mean. But, like something that just goes far deeper than the black trunks and the red gloves. And I think like you hit, maybe it was just like, people have an idea of Mike Tyson, so let's just like feed into the same old idea. But like you were at it, like, wait, there's something more here, and why not just talk about it and get this open? Because it's going to be far more interesting than anything you've ever heard before.
Well, and I think I agree. I mean, there was a narrative that was shaped. I think largely he contributed to it. But again, I couldn't understand why the popular narrative was this guy's an animal, a monster, a victimizer. Mm-hmm. And yet somehow he's like, that's a headline. But the fine print of him was a lot more interesting that nobody seemed to be talking about, which is how do you stay relevant for 30 years, stay on the front page and the back page again and again and again, and endlessly surprise the culture, while the culture never seemed to surprise him. That doesn't happen accidentally. It might happen accidentally once or twice, but not for 3 decades with a culture with our attention span. So it seemed like there was a lot more intelligence at work, and instinctually just a preternatural ability to surprise us, to read where we were coming from and go left or go right to new places, and to, by the way, to supply better quotes than any writers are writing about him. I think he delivered some of the best quotes of any athlete. If Hemingway was writing Tyson quotes, I think we'd refer to them as some of the greatest quotes that any character ever spoke. I mean, they're better than Tarantino could come up with. Mm-hmm. But we always thought like, oh, he's just behaving this way because of his bizarre pathos or whatever. I didn't believe that for a second. They seemed tremendously calculated. They were always beautifully timed. So I just thought there's a lot more to this person, and why not deal with him instead of in the popular narrative that he's an idiot, deal with him as somebody who's been the most brilliant self-marketer I think that exists. I think you could say something similar with Donald Trump. Like, I don't know how intelligent he is. I've spoken to a number of people who've interviewed him or been around him, but obviously instinctually in remaining relevant, instinctually taking people down, he's as smart as they come.
On the Tim Ferriss show podcast, he was talking to Scott Adams, who's the creator of the Dilbert cartoon, and Scott Adams kind of schooled a little bit in hypnotism, and as a result, he's been wickedly fascinated with Donald Trump because he's using very, very subtle hypnotic cues and kind of jumping on certain things that it's kind of like just kind of like subtly swaying people in his favor, and it's kind of like goes to your idea. Like there is a sort of I don't know if it's sinister, but you could see it as sinister, or a little bit of conniving thing going on there, where you'll take a little thing and just kind of spin it in such a way that it does get certain people into a trance. And so Scott Adams is just like wildly fascinated with this guy, and I think goes to what you're saying. Like there's probably there's probably far more intelligence behind them. You don't get to be that wealthy without being at least halfway intelligent. So I imagine that there's a lot more going on behind the curtain than we realize.
Well, I think there's just a gross overestimation of intelligence in the first place. There's no correlation between intelligence and judgment. There's no correlation between intelligence and wisdom or insight. So right away, to be divorced from those other three kind of conflicts with our basic understanding of what intelligence is, but yet intuitively we know Bill Clinton, no matter how intelligent he is, being a Rhodes Scholar, is making incredibly stupid decisions when it comes to sex or exposing himself to scandal or, destroying the Democratic Party, Al Gore's chances, et cetera, et cetera. So we're working with something else that's really the rudder for what's leading his life. And it certainly doesn't have much to do with the man's intelligence, because nobody's questioning that. So that's another thing that I've tried to do with this work, is to reach people not with great ideas necessarily. I mean, I try to find the best ideas that I can, but to emotionally arrive at places that resonate deeply. And that's advertising, creating an emotion in somebody, or music. That's what's going to really stick, not some great idea or little conversation starter at a water cooler. That's all well and good, but to make this stuff last, make somebody feel something that they didn't expect to feel. And Trump does that. Trump makes people feel something. Tyson definitely makes people feel something. Lance Armstrong created probably the biggest narrative that any athlete has ever come up with the Cancer Jesus routine. You can come back from this terrible illness that's affected every family in the world, and you can come back better. You can come back even stronger. Well, I mean, that's a $1 billion narrative that he was selling to people. Just by buying a wristband, they were part of that philosophy. And I think it was enough of something people wanted to believe in and buy into that, they dismissed all the evidence that was tearing down the rest of him,
Yeah. People want to be a part of a tribe, and that the yellow bracelet certainly created enough artifice behind what you say is like the inexplicable evidence behind winning 7 tours and in such dominant fashion that it's like that almost clouded the judgment, like, because you want to believe that it's all true. But in any case, like, you were talking about interviewing Talese, Errol Morris, Mike Tyson, like these really big figures. I wonder what I know if I were to interview someone like that, I would just be like terribly nervous and anxiety ridden and biting my nails for 24 hours straight. But I wonder, like, how you feel approaching interviewing these sort of titanic figures.
I definitely have fits of nerves internally, but I think my thing with it is it's almost more personal, in the sense of the juice for me with journalism is not money or recognition. Like, my ego isn't tied into that. My ego is tied into access. And I feel like I want access to people who really intrigue me. I'm so obsessive that all of these people we're talking about are obsessives. They're all addicts to something. They're extreme cases. And so I feel like it's kind of like, I guess a good example would be, my brother was a skinny guy who picked a lot of fights, and he would pick on much bigger people. If, usually defending somebody else, he would stand up to bullies. And it always astounded me how somebody so much smaller could instill fear in bigger people. And I asked him about it, and he said, well, if you meet somebody like that with 100% willpower, you're 100% invested in going all the way, fighting them, they know that they have to meet you at the same amount of willpower, or else they're going to back down. And so when I was meeting Mike Tyson, he could recognize that I was the most obsessive person that he's ever met in terms of wanting to meet Mike Tyson. Because the guy had literally saved my life when I was a kid, reading about his story and hearing about his bullying and that kind of thing. So I was coming at him, I think, with two things. One, that I was just as obsessive and, I think you have to be crazier than Mike Tyson to have him be your hero at some point. Certainly not an easy thing to admit to women who are prospective girls you want to date and that kind of thing. And I just think with these other people, like I'm not interviewing anybody where it's even strictly, even partially sort of a professional, perfunctory kind of thing. I'm obsessed with what these people do. And I think it shows when I meet them. It doesn't mean I'm like some raving lunatic when I encounter them. I'm not. But I think that you can recognize, like an addict can recognize another addict. And I just adore the access of meeting these people. And I think that offsets in a lot of ways just the intrinsic nervousness of, oh, I might fuck this up, or it's a boring question, or, you know, I want it to be the best interview that they've ever done. And I've put as much energy as I possibly could. And in many ways, I feel like my whole life has been preparation to make it something interesting, you know? And so some of these people afterwards, when an Errol Morris gives you his phone number and just says, this was fun, and it's gone 4.5 hours after his secretary said, you're going to have 1 hour, so like make the most of it. It gives you a little bit more confidence to try with other people to create your own thing, rather than the sort of paint by number effect that might feel like the safer way to do it. And I'm not somebody who sort of bats for average. I want to swing for the fence every time, and I don't mind striking out. This is an industry where you're going to strike out most of the time, probably a lot worse than in baseball. But when you feel that crack of the bat, you know, igniting with somebody else, and it's all about chemistry with the person. It's not you being great or even them being great. It's just in that moment in time that, you know, you're off and running and you're just somewhere special. I mean, there's no place that I would rather be. And, you know, I didn't understand when I first got into boxing writing and you tend to fight. You know, these are people who've devoted their life to covering boxing. You'd think they'd be thrilled that they get paid to go to fights. And most of them look miserable. Mm-hmm. Some of them have a lot of contempt for what they're covering. I mean, journalists are a pretty mean breed. You know, I think there's a saying that I forget who said it. It might have been Hunter S. Thompson. But whatever happens to a pimp, no matter how awful, it's always funny because it's a pimp. And I've noticed the same thing is true if you go on YouTube and watch compilations of journalists, especially TV journalists, having terrible things happen to them. It's always funny. Always. And you wonder, why is it? And I think it's because, you know, there's this tremendous hypocrisy that they're doing some kind of wonderful service to humanity by reporting the truth. But the other thing is you recognize very quickly is that human tragedy is just a commodity to these people. They're thrilled if there's blood that they can report and lead with it on their news station and get better ratings. So, you know, I'm aware that there's something ugly about what we do, you know, parasitic. And often even worse than being parasitic is we devour the hosts of everybody that we're devouring, you know. So I try not to do that, but I still feel a certain repulsion to what I do in meeting people and then, you know, spending 5 days with a boxer and he gets somewhere really dark that's new about suicidal impulses or abuse that he's endured, and then you report it and you do the best you can to make it connect to people in a meaningful way, to give compassion for all the people who risk their lives getting in the ring and show people who are off stage who, you know, are the family members and friends and the community of these people. But there's another part of you that's just like, you know, the worse this goes, the more people are going to connect to it. You know, the more people are going to connect to what you're trying to say about it. And you're just kind of like, ooh, I can't root for that to happen. I liked this guy. I liked his family. I liked his children. Ugh.
Yeah.
I wish I was doing something more constructive, you know?
Yeah. It's that I've never been the type of person that I couldn't be like a beat news reporter, like going to funerals, car accidents, fires. I know some people get all kinds of jacked up about that, but for me, it just doesn't appeal to my sensibility, that swoop in, swoop out, it's very like it just doesn't. You're appeal. I have a feeling you have the same kind of feeling in that you at least want, if you're going to be that quote unquote the parasite, you're gonna drain them of their story and then tell it in as fair a way as possible, but for sort of your own gain in a lot of ways. But I just couldn't do it in such a way where it felt like you were just hovering over this carry-on and then just feeding on it and then taking off for the next byline. I imagine that you kind of feel similarly in that sense.
Well, it is a high wire act, because like when I listen to Talise talk about that there's dignity with everything that I do, and all of the subjects that I've reported on, I've done it with dignity, and I want them all to feel kind of feel good after they've read my story and the way that they've been portrayed. And I think, well, it's good for you, it's good for them. Is it good for us? Most people are not dignified. Like, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
And that's well and good. I mean, but it almost seems like kind of a Victorian value system. And I don't know if that's I really, and I'm not big with Hunter S. Thompson the way that he's mainly gained his popularity with the drugs, or just that whole cartoonish image with other celebrities stopping over in Woody Creek. I don't care about any of that. I find that depressing. But his early stuff, looking into the Hells Angels, and again, recognizing something that was right in front of everybody that nobody else saw, that the Hells Angels are not an aberration from American society. They're a byproduct of it. Then we're somewhere new. Then I get it. Just like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not an aberration of this society. He is a direct byproduct of democracy becoming pro wrestling. Donald Trump looks just as good in Vince McMahon's WWE wrestling ring, screaming to a mob, as he does now, sort of on the pulpit,
Yeah.
misquoting the Bible and whatever. And that's, it's become a reality show. So he fits in very well, whereas these other sort of career politicians look kind of silly and they look boring, and it's not as good copy. And that's what it's been reduced to, is the bottom line is just ratings. That's why he brings it up again and again and again. And I've sort of noticed and identified the same thing with boxing in the art world, is that, like, in the art world, the biggest thing that the art market has given us culturally in the last 50 years is the market itself. Not any great works of art, just the market. Just making the people who own these things have it go up in value for them. But is it any better for it in terms of for the rest of us? I don't think it is. And similarly in boxing, I'm covering Pacquiao Mayweather, the fight of the century. One guy's making almost $300 million. Is it a good fight? No, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's worthless. And yet there's just this bizarre haywire thing going on in the culture where all we care about is the box office. We don't care about if it's any good, what's being shown. And that's very strange, because I think there was much more of an understanding of what value meant. And now all value is just how much does it cost. And that's scary to me. I mean, I love Andy Warhol, but I think as much as his shrewdness at understanding the culture allowed him to flourish, I think it also destroyed it. And somebody like him becoming as mainstream accepted as he is, I mean, this is one of the weirdest people imaginable. I mean, like Michael Jackson weird, where there's another guy who's openly singing songs called "Keep It in the Closet," and then people are shocked that he's a pedophile. Like, you're like, he is screaming it to you. He's jumping on stage, grabbing his crotch, saying, "Keep it in the closet." And then we're kind of taken aback with all these children he's been carrying around. He can barely kiss a grown woman anywhere. So it always just makes me question not the weirdness of some of these people who flourish, but the society that allows them to flourish. And I think that's a very common narrative in most of my work, is like that the real monster is not the so-called monsters that are on the stage, but it's us paying them unbelievable amounts of money and attention and saying, oh, this has nothing to do with us. I think it has everything to do with us. It's a perfect reflection of us, a perfect canary in the coal mine of our society.
Yeah, that's There's a lot to chew on there, because it goes to, no one cares about authenticity anymore. It's about artifice. And I think, like you were saying, with whether it's whether it's Pacquiao Mayweather or bullfighting in the 21st century now, you're dealing with a lot of just a lot of conflicting stuff on the surface that are like deeply reflecting of sort of like who the people are consuming this tainted product on the field or in the arena,
Oh, I agree. And I mean, one of the hopeful things that I get from this is, like, if this was enough, if, going to the movies, what do I see? What are the movie trailers? I went to see The Revenant last night. What are the movie trailers before? One after another, it's America blowing itself up, right? It's some monster attacking us or some natural disaster, on and on and on. It's us fetishizing, destroying ourselves. So it makes me think, like, and I mean, the amount of gambling addiction, alcoholism, drug dependence, illicit or pharmaceutical, on and on and on. People are really struggling to cope. It's really hard right now for people to cope. They're following the so-called blueprint of, like, the pursuit of happiness, and yet there's so much frustration and pain and guilt and suffering. So what are the movies offering? Distraction. What is TV, the culture, offering? Distraction. So it's hopeful to me that if this was enough, that people would actually be happy with it, and clearly they're not, which tells me that there's still a deep yearning for something meaningful and impactful that they're reaching for, and so I don't know. That's why somebody like Hunter S. Thompson, it's so interesting to me, because I just think he's, in the tradition of George Orwell and Mark Twain, like this incredible voice of commentary about what's going on. Look at how he diagnosed 9/11. I mean, he forecast exactly where it was going before anybody else did, and this was a very destroyed version of Hunter at that point. But now he's just a clown, like to most people who care about him in the culture. He's just that, Uncle Duke, the cartoon character come to life, and that's shocking to me, given the breadth of work and insight that he offered.
Yeah, and getting back to something you said earlier about being being an obsessive person, I get a sense that you do a tremendous amount of thinking about this, about whatever it is you want to sink your teeth into. You kind of like really sort of almost like meditate over it and really sort of swim in it. So to what extent do you, when you're in the throes of some sort of a project that really like raised your hackles in a way, like this is something I want to dive into, like to what extent are you just thinking about it before you do any sort of writing or reporting?
Well, I try not to think about it, and I try to think. I always have no idea how to get started. It's with almost every project I do, I get tremendous anxiety of where the hell do I begin. So where I begin, which is a lot easier for me, is to know I'm probably going to end up with 10,000 words somehow with each one of these things that I do, which most of the time I do arrive at. So I want to read one book for every 1,000 words that seemingly has nothing to do with what I'm writing about. This just loosely, tangentially connected. So if it's bullfighting, I want to read about the Napoleonic Wars when he went into Spain. I want to read about the Civil War. I want to read about all the Spanish masters that are in the Prado. I want to read about the current economic climate in Spain. So already we've gone a lot of places in reading that. What the hell does this have to do with bullfighting? Well, it has everything to do with bullfighting, because bullfighting is at the heart of a cultural past that Spain is trying to get rid of, while other people are trying to cling to it. Then you look at, Spain invading Mexico, like invading the Mayan culture, like the legacy of Spain, how it affected the world. And so I try to bring, by the end of it, I've read 10 books that I hadn't read before about this subject, and I just find that drawing from all of those sources, leads to a lot of ideas and connections that become interesting pathways to enter into bullfighting and make it accessible for people who either know nothing about it or are total experts on it. That both of them can listen to me, because I'm not saying I'm for this and here's my defense of it. Not go lawyer with it, but just offer this kind of confection of a couple of months of really frantic research into it and finding these parallels in ways that I think just haven't been there before. So again, we're somewhere new. And the somewhere new isn't something I'm telling you is right. It's just observing stuff. It's just sort of riding these 10 books waves into how there seems to be a kind of musical connection to the ostensible subject. So you're getting some counterpoint, you're getting some harmony, and both of those are not things that you expected. And then I think it's just holding the reader's hand to the end, promising something, and then delivering it. Like, you have to deliver on what you promise or people are going to be annoyed. Like, why did I have to invest 25 minutes in that thing? But taking them somewhere new that requires some of their agency, that they have to choose to get there. Like what Steinbeck said at the beginning of Cannery Row, that there are some delicate creatures in the sea. You can't just extract them. You have to offer them something that they themselves willingly climb onto. And I think you have to do that with the readers. You have to want to offer a reader the best that you have. Not have contempt for the reader or try to prove your erudition or education, but really try to offer them the best that you have possibly learned about the subject or thought about it, and be excited to sort of, I think Nabokov said, like, you start off with a reader on opposite sides of a mountain and you want to embrace them on the top of it at the end of that journey. And I just think that's a beautiful concept. And it takes a while to get there, where you find your own confidence that you think that they're going to embrace you when you get on top of the mountain. That they're not going to be like, I just spent 25 minutes on this. Fuck you. That wasn't satisfying. Instead of thinking that they're going to come up there and say, I've got a few stories to tell you after that. And that's my favorite thing. I want more stories. I want to keep going with this. There's no end to this. And just like the research that seems to organically flow from an assignment takes me somewhere completely new for the next year.
And I got a sense from the bullfighting piece that it was, as much as it was about sort of like old Spain and new Spain and a country at odds with itself, that it was also in a lot of ways this kind of like a story about time and our relationship with time. And I wonder what your relationship with time is. If you feel like it's something you wrestle with, or you feel like it's getting away from you, or I gotta step on the gas because shit, I'm gonna be, we're gonna die soon. I wonder what your relationship to that is, because I felt like that was kind of a theme to me pulsating under that piece.
That was the first thing I wrote about it. It was completely a study of time. That was the first idea that I jotted down about what bullfighting was about. Because the first time I saw it, I was 18, and so as I was writing that story, I just turned 36. So I was like, half my life ago was when I first saw this. Where did that go? Because it sure seemed to go by a lot faster than the first 18 years. So why is that? Is it just because, from second grade to third grade, a year is a much larger block of the total that you've inhabited? Or is it what you're doing in that time? It's an interesting question of how you move through time versus how time moves through you. And bullfighting is about death. I mean, it's right up front. It's right up front that, how something is being led to the slaughter in front of you. No veil. It's totally honest and up front. So, somebody told me about, talking about bullfighting, there's far more horrors that go on every day at a McDonald's than has gone on in all the bull rings in Spanish history. And it's so true. And none of us have any problems walking. Well, I mean, we do going into a McDonald's, but you know what I mean, because you don't see the suffering that's gone into just a Happy Meal.
Yeah.
Right? So I was confronted the first time I saw a bullfight with when death came into my awareness at like 8 years old. Oh my God, my dad's going to die. My babysitter was in a car accident where 5 of her kids died, and she had to get a lobotomy to deal with the trauma, which was done in those days. Witnessing my grandmother dying of cancer, slow death. All of it just washed over me as I'm watching this condemned animal, and I'm thinking, is it meant to elicit this kind of emotional, spiritual catharsis? Because I'm being overwhelmed by these things. And you talk to a lot of people who've been bitten by it, and they say, of course it does. That's the design of it. Because you have the bull who's meant to inhabit a human being's futile struggle against death. This is just a calling card to a fate that awaits all of us. And the man in the bullfight is meant to play the role of death. So all your sympathy is meant to be with that bull, and the matador has to earn your respect, earn your sympathy, so that you're rooting for him, because that bull has no chance. After 15 minutes, he can kill a couple more matadors after the first one, and they're still going to shoot him. That was just the idea that somebody would come up with that idea, going back hundreds of years to where bullfighting was on horseback, and it was rich people trying to show their valor, chasing around a bull in preparation for fighting other men on horseback and that kind of thing. And one of the guys was knocked off the horse. A bull pinned him and was about to kill him, and somebody jumped out of the stands and waved his sombrero in ronda to try and lure the bull away. And he did it several times. And people were like, this is way more interesting than what we were just watching. What the hell is going on here? And that guy, Pedro Romero, substituted his hat for a cape. That's bullfighting. And suddenly a so-called sport that was only fought by the wealthy for poor people was fought by poor people for the wealthy. So there are just so many, surprising things about it that I love anything that the more you learn about it, the less you understand. That's something that's really gratifying and beautiful for me, and I'm sure for somebody else is tremendously frustrating and a waste of time. But for me, that's where intellectually my real passion is insatiable curiosity about things that pay that dividend of, every time you return to it, you find something new. And I'm very much a rereader of books, because I keep finding the author laughing at me, saying, "Oh, you just got here now?" And I thought, well, I've read you 5 fucking times. I'm sorry. I'm trying. I'm reading all the references you're referring to. I don't know what took me so long, but yeah, I'm here now. And then next you come back to it, and it's all over again.
Yeah, they're like, it's been there the whole time, you idiot. You should have caught it the first time.
Absolutely.
Alluding to what you just said about being just endlessly curious, you had a nice little passage in the bullfighting piece with Hemingway about people's obsession with him, and also how he's grown to be this interesting figure, but above all, he was an interested figure. Mm-hmm. He was always outwardly watching, so then he could internalize everything and then tell the proper story. And I wonder, what influence has? I think it sums it up in that sentence right there. But and also just hearing you talk about it. But what influence has at least the Tao or the Zen of Hemingway had on you in that he's an experiencer going out there to tell these stories? I kind of feel that in your work. I imagine that he's had a tremendous influence on you in that sense.
He did. I think he's hopelessly misread. I mean, I think that I was never interested in going out trophy hunting. I barely touch alcohol, none of that kind of thing. I'm not out there trying to prove my masculinity. I don't want to be a fighter. I learned how to box so I wouldn't have to fight. I haven't had to have a fight outside of a ring since I learned how to fight, and to me that's a success. So it's very different than him and our demons are very different, he and I. What I love about him philosophically, that I think is him at his deepest, is all the short stories, and I think most of the novels, come back to the same theme, which is reaching back for a past that, reaching back to his youth, to Michigan, to this place where it was this Eden, and then wondering, where the towns are burnt down, or the transportation has changed, or the whole setup of it has been eradicated and transformed. Progress, the thing we never question in our society, unless you're the Unabomber. And then once he does question it, we say he's insane, right? Because who could question progress? There's another part of Hemingway that's saying, was it really there? Was it really as good as I remember it? I don't know. And that suspicion, that endless suspicion in yourself, are you romanticizing it? And where's the next place to go? I mean, Hemingway was hugely influenced by Mark Twain, and my sense with him going to Cuba, what largely took me to Cuba, was that America's most famous writer, why is it he can't find America in America anymore? Why does he have to go to Cuba for it? And so when I went there in 2000, I mean, I've always been obsessed with America as somebody who's not from here. Was why am I finding the 1950s wet dream of America that's long dead in the United States in Cuba thriving? And they're not anti-American, any of these people that I'm meeting. Like, it was just so fascinatingly strange and bizarre and conflicting with what the popular narrative was. And so with Hemingway, again, there was that sense of this Huckleberry Finn wanting to find a river that nobody else was fishing in, that I just thought was very beautiful and sad and tragic. And I think early on the book of his that's most affected me, which again ties into American politics, I think, in an interesting way, was For Whom the Bell Tolls, which the protagonist in that, Robert Jordan, was cited by both President Obama and who he was running against, John McCain, in that election, as their favorite hero in literature. And I thought, well, that's strange. What an odd intersection that both these guys with so many opposing political views were so inspired by the same guy, this very left-leaning character who was fighting a losing battle in a foreign country.
Yeah.
So I love that Hemingway, I love his ability to exist in the ambiguous. I love that it took him 10 years to deal with his father's suicide, and then finally delving into it in that book, as I say, with what can be gained from fighting in a losing battle. Again, and we're back to bullfighting. What we're all going to die, and so what do you want to do about it? What does your life mean? And I mean, the thing with bullfighting is ostensibly it's about death, but it has nothing to do with death. It has everything to do with what's brought to life while facing death. And that endlessly interests me because it confronts me with every person I care about, why they're doing what they're doing. Because we're all the Titanic. We're all thinking we're going to end up at some destination that we're not going to end up at, and there's some iceberg waiting for us that we're going to collide with. All of us.
Yeah.
And so
we can't change course. We're going to hit the damn thing.
We're going to hit the damn thing. So, do we come up with some ideology? Do we philosophize about it? Are we screaming rats trying to find not enough lifeboats? Or are we those guys on the deck who are like, what are we here to do? We're here to play music. So let's not bother scrambling. Let's do what we're here to do with the time that we have left. And, that's not my natural inclination. My natural inclination is probably to put a gun to my head going, oh my God, I don't want to deal with freezing water and non-lifeboats and all these crazy maniacs scrambling. But at my best, what I'd like to be is that guy who just takes the violin and starts playing. And, I think writing for me is the only thing I can do where I feel like I'm applying that with my own relationship with the time that I have left, is communicating my relationship to the world and what I care about.
And in that piece, you wrote this great sentence referring to one of the bullfighters who was in some ways disabled. He didn't have quite the motor skills that you would associate with a bullfighter, and you said he bluffed his way into the life of his dreams. Mm. And what I loved about that, I thought of you because you have a very unorthodox path in journalism, and I wondered if when you were writing that sentence, or maybe it was subconscious or something, that what was the degree of relation to that sentence? Not that you bluffed yourself. Like I don't want me to say like you've conned us or into something. I think your talent speaks for itself. But I wonder if there was any element of like you've come at it from such a different angle that you have entered this life and telling these stories that you deeply want to tell, but you've come at it from a different level. So in a sense, that sentence I feel applies to you in some ways.
Oh, I completely think it's a con. Completely. And I mean, but by the same token, who are the people that I loved growing up? Who are my heroes? Bobby Fischer never went to school to learn how to be a chess player. Orson Welles never went to film school. Van Gogh didn't go to art school. Hemingway didn't go to college.
They just did it.
They just fucking did it. And the fact that they did it on their own terms revealed their own individuality. And I have more bias than anybody I've ever met to see people come into flower as individuals. That's what I want. I don't want you to become, some people have written me to say, I want to write like this piece or whatever. No, write like you. I want to see what you have. I want your loot. I don't want you trying to be Fitzgerald or Hemingway or any of these other people. I mean, I think it's a problem, with writing schools, and I'm not opposed to them. I mean, if you get benefit from it, great. But I think there's a problem in learning how to think and learning how to learn. I want to see where people are going to go on their own. Like Orson Welles telling an Oscar-winning cinematographer, Greg Toland, here's what I want you to do with the camera. And Toland says, I don't know how to do that. Like, nobody's ever done that before. Well, good. Go learn it. Do it. And Welles was asked about that. He was asked about why everything looks so fucking different with what he does. And he said, well, there's a joke about a guy who goes to the doctor and says, I have a headache. I have a headache every day. And the doctor says, well, just go through your day. What do you do? Well, I get up at 8 a.m, I have orange juice, I have breakfast, I do some push-ups, I throw up, I say goodbye to my wife, and I go to work. Whoa. You throw up every day? Yeah, doesn't everybody? And Wells's response was, with the way he sees everything, doesn't everybody? And I think that's just, for me, it's just so magical that there are people who allow that to happen. Where sometimes it happens with an athlete, where a guy who's a fencer will just be like, you know what, I'm going to do this left-handed for the rest of my life. Fuck it. And becomes the best ever, sort of thing. There's just, those are the people who woo me, who inspire me. And so I wasn't any good at doing it at the conventional path. It wasn't like I was succeeding. I wasn't trying to do something different. I just failed again and again and again. I was failing every creative writing course that I took. And teachers were quite nasty about what I was doing, and at a certain point, you give yourself permission to be you and to try to find, what you have to say, what your music is that you can offer. A lot of people go to their graves without their music ever being heard, and I don't know that mine is better than anybody else's, but I was damn sure I wasn't going to waste time trying to play somebody else's music. I wanted to see what mine would be. And by the same token, I'm just as selfish and greedy of wanting to hear other people's, which is why I'm trying to find people, interview people, and every subject that I focus on, I try to find all the experts. It's not like I think I'm the only expert. I think I'm the least qualified. I just think I'm totally addicted to the subject. So I go out of my way to try and recruit these people to offer their insights and their wisdom on it, and hoping that I can offer the reader something that they can't find anywhere else. Because all the writers and artists that I adore, J.D. Salinger was saying fuck you to the publishing world, but his readers said, you know what? We can't get what this guy's offering anywhere else. So we don't care what critics are saying. We don't care that he won't market his stuff or put his picture on the book jacket or do interviews or go on talk shows. We just can't get this anywhere else. And that's something that I value, I think, almost more than anything else from humanity. That's what redeems humanity for me, is when people allow themselves to be who they are.
Yeah, I was listening to a panel at a conference a few years ago. It was just on the personal essay. And one guy, I forget his name, but he said something like, "What's great about when the essay is really, really humming on all cylinders, and it can be a piece of reported journalism too. But that's like a ticket into that writer's mind, and I always love that because when I read, say, David Foster Wallace talking about cruises or the Maine Lobster Festival or the 2000 political campaign, it's just like, how fun is it to be with that mind for that period of time, however long it's going to be? And like you're alluding to it right there. It's just like, where can we get those? We can't get those minds anywhere else because they have to be who they are, and then we get to join them. And isn't that lovely?
Absolutely, and I think that there's a through line with that we're talking before about journalism being parasitic. I think the same thing is true with critics, that they can't exist without the art being made. They need to piggyback on it. So, I'm not saying that Hemingway didn't write some books that I think were terrible, and the critics definitely agreed with me. And and you can learn something from criticism. Some of my favorite writers are critics. Robert Hughes, in his art criticism, writes better ideas, more passionate feelings that are expressed about art in terms of his understanding than I'm getting anywhere else. So I love critics who are trying to find something, not just make a name for themselves. But, I think, it's interesting to be in a world where every time I go to the Metropolitan Museum, who is the artist who all the people want to clamor around? It's Van Gogh. He's the one they're taking all these selfies with, and usually they're not even looking at the paintings while they take the selfies, and often they'll take pictures of themselves looking at a painting that they weren't actually looking at, which is a particularly weird selfie. Yeah. But then I go to Cuba, and I'm looking at these guys, these athletes, who are turning down millions of dollars to sell themselves on the marketplace, and I think, why isn't this more interesting to people? Because Van Gogh was trying to sell his stuff, right? Like, he was failing, but these guys are going beyond that, and they're not selling it. They're saying, fuck you. Like, what we're doing is more important than just selling it. And similarly, like, I'm going to Mexico at the end of the week. There's a matador I'm going to see, Jose Tomas, from the article that you read.
Yeah.
He hasn't allowed televisions to film him in 16 years. He just says, you know what? Fuck you. Well, wait, we have all these monetary concerns. We need it to be televised, so that we can pay you. I don't care. Fuck you. So the only, whatever I'm going to see there'll be a few people with their phones filming or whatever, but it's not going to be shown the way everything else is shown that has enormous value to people, like tremendous monetary value. And I find that so fascinating and so much more interesting.
How did you get access to him for this? If he's kind of, I guess, not a recluse, but somewhat of a, I don't know. He's not. I would doubt he's on the Salinger end of the recluse spectrum or the Bill Watterson end. But how did you get access to such a titanic figure in bullfighting? 16 years without granting an audience, really.
Well, I don't know that I have access to him directly at all. I know a photographer who's been close to him, and while I was in Pamplona over the summer, I did meet a close circle that was kind of the offspring of Hemingway being in Pamplona in the late 1950s. There were people who knew him back when he was going to Pamplona. When Hemingway killed himself, he had tickets to go to that year's San Fermin in 1961. So it was quite interesting how the connective tissue there. But I met some of these guys. One of them was 80 years old, and some of them were younger guys writing books about bullfighting who know far more about it than I do. And I just said, is this guy, in your view, as good as people are saying? And the ones who'd seen him fight made the point that when people say he's the greatest one who ever lived, it's because when you watch him, you just can't conceive of anything being better. And again, I quite love that. In the same way that I like when Beethoven did his ninth, a lot of other composers would go from 8 to 10 of their own symphonies because they didn't want it compared to the ninth. Huh. It's a primary color. Leave it alone. I just leave the comparison alone because it can only look bad. And there's just something about that with any character that I'm remotely interested in what they do. I mean, I'm interested in excellence anywhere. Excellence in any field is something that's going to intrigue me and fascinate me. But something where the better you are, the more danger you're accepting, the closer you are to getting killed. I can't think of anything else that's like that. You know, Floyd Mayweather is the best boxer in the world, but that also means he's the safest boxer in the world. Whereas Jose Tomas is the greatest matador maybe who ever lived, and he's more in danger of getting killed every second that you're watching him than anybody else. And that's just such a fascinating contradiction to me that I can't get it anywhere else. So I found out that he was fighting in Mexico. I was able to sell it to Glenn to get them interested to do a second bullfighting story in 6 months, which is a huge favor, I think, to me that it ended. And when the tickets came on Mexican Ticketmaster at like 2 a.m, it sold out in probably 5 minutes or something, but I was able to get 5 pretty shitty seats and try to lure Hemingway's grandchildren who were going to come, and Booker Prize winning author DBC Pierre was somebody I invited who I've corresponded with for a long time, somebody who's been a real mentor to me when the chips were low, as they were for him. He was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and then the first book he wrote was the Booker Prize winner. So I was very inspired by that as a kind of patron saint, that maybe there's some way out of this hole that just seemed to be getting deeper and deeper. And then somebody I interviewed was Wright Thompson, who's written a couple of wonderful pieces for ESPN Magazine about bullfighting as well, and he's quite a Hemingway junkie himself. So I just thought, try to make this as interesting as possible for, well, I guess myself. Selfishly, I thought this would be a really fun circle to watch this guy, maybe for the last time. He's 40 years old. And B, for a reader, this is going to be pretty unusual. I have no idea where this is going to go.
Yeah, and I think for the greatest bullfighters, the only way to go out is on their shield, so to speak. So, like, are you expecting that this guy could be cheating death in a way that he's never cheated death before?
100%. 100%. And there's no reason not to think it, because the last 5 years he's put on, since he had children, I mean, he's gotten even more reckless. And the description I heard that might be the title of the piece was, he has a style of bullfighting that nobody's ever done before, which was described as the statue in the storm.
Yeah, that's it. There's no other title.
No, it's beautiful. And,
Yeah.
you know, I'm just rereading a lot of stuff now. I bought a handful of bullfighting books, and the bullfighter you were referencing earlier, Belmonte, who was not just had some physical problems, he was a full-on cripple. Like, I mean, he couldn't run, he couldn't jump. No, I mean, it just has even more than boxing in terms of being exposed for who you are, for what you stand up to, for what you stand for. Bullfighting is like another dimension entirely. I mean, I often think about it in terms of like magic, that it's so interesting to me with magic. It doesn't matter what the secret is that you have, because if I tell you what the secret is to a trick that's dazzled you, you go, oh, whatever, that's it? It's the trick that you use it for, right?
Yeah.
You know, so you have to keep those secrets. Those secrets are what are worth money for other magicians. Whereas in bullfighting, it's the same kind of adrenaline rush and wonder, but there is no secret. The secret is the guy's about to die. The guy has a horn coming at his heart, and he's sitting there calmly. Like, I mean, even bullfighters' bodies are not like athletes. It's like they've been forged in just trying to be elegant in the face of death. And what an incredibly weird purpose for a physique to be shaped by, but it's true.
Yeah.
So,
well, they look like male dancers. You know, like in the ballet. You know, they're built like that, and in the arena, that's exactly what they're doing, is dancing with the bull and dancing with death. Yeah,
there's not even. I mean, it's funny because the word in Spain for bullfighting it's not actually bullfighting. It's torear. It's like there's an expression, bullfight life, and it's not, you can't fight a bull. Like the word has no translation in English, what they're doing, which is also quite appealing to me. It's another one of these primary colors. There's just, when it's good, and most of the time it's not good, you just can't get what they're doing anywhere else. And it makes your mind and heart soar in a way that just nothing else I've ever encountered does.
Very nice. Tell you what, Brin, you've been very generous with your time. I have a lot of stuff I still want to ask you, but sure. I want to be respectful of your time. So I'll let you go. Maybe we can have a part 2 at some point. I'm happy.
I've got another half hour if you do.
Yeah. I've got some. Yeah, I definitely have an extra half hour. So let's keep on going. You referred earlier, you had some creative writing classes, that you had some nasty teachers who undoubtedly gave you, kind of put you down, and probably even discouraged you from pursuing a career in letters, or even a hobby in letters. So what was it between your ears that made you want to keep going in the face of that criticism?
There were 2 teachers. One was very shitty. She flunked me from creative writing because I didn't really like the rules that she laid out. So we had kind of a confrontation. And the other teacher, who was aptly named Miss Champion, she was a diehard feminist, and I was, not a very happy teenager. So because I knew she was a feminist, I wanted to piss her off. And not that I was anti-women, but I was just anti-authority. So that was my way in to sort of needle her. And she said, I see you reading these books. I've never seen you read a female before. And I said, well, I just don't think they're as good. And she said, okay. And she went to her desk. She wrote a list down. She brought it over. Jane Austen, Blixen. I think there were 6 other names that were in there. Marguerite Duras, Alice Munro. I don't remember the exact names anymore. She said, go read these, come back to me, and repeat what you just said. So I went home, spent the next 3 days reading them, came back to her, and I said, I was completely wrong. I was completely wrong. These were incredible. And it was the first time that a teacher had confronted me in a way that was constructive, challenging me beyond a stupid knee-jerk bias. And she allowed me, because I'd failed English, to skip a year. And it was the first time I was just really interested in learning, because for many years I've just been closed off. I come from a family of readers, but my rebellion was to read nothing, play video games and all that kind of thing. But after getting involved with boxing, and I mean literally going to a boxing gym and a library, 2 places I'd never been before on my own, I went to them both on the same day after hearing an interview with Mike Tyson talking about bullying. And I've been obsessed with both ever since. So that was the major catalyst. And largely that teacher just sort of, doing what happens to so many people. A teacher just being there to nurture you and to guide you a little bit and challenge you. And so that woman, very kind, sweet, bright lady, I owe her a lot.
Yeah, she gave you the nudge in the right direction, or probably even the confidence to carry on. I imagine that if enough people tell you no, you're going to start to believe them, unless you're extremely headstrong and borderline delusional. But it's like someone probably saw that talent in you and were like, you know what, we just need to just give him the right push on the ice, and then his own momentum will let him sort of carry him across the pond.
Well, there was a in the creative writing class that I failed, I wrote about going into the slum where the boxing gym was that I went to. Like, there was some exercise, write for 10 minutes about whatever you want. And so for the 10 minutes I wrote about being very scared walking through this drug-infested sort of zombie land area in Vancouver, where you had to, I could have taken the bus, but I wanted to walk through it. I wanted to get over my fear. I was just so overwhelmed by cowardice and fear, but I wanted to face it. I didn't know if I would get over it or anything, but I just had to, more afraid of being afraid or something like that. And when I wrote about it, in most cities, I mean, Vancouver certainly, but I think it's true of many cities, they die in their heart first. So the heart of where Vancouver started was where it had really decayed and become rotten. And the neglect was so overwhelming. So I wrote about that experience. And by far the best student in the class, after we were forced to read these things publicly, and I hate talking publicly. I'm a terrible public speaker. A girl in that class who was easily the most gifted approached me after, and she just said, I'm so jealous of what you just did and your talent. And for whatever reason, I thought I never have to ask permission anymore to do this, ever again. And I never did. I didn't care how many hundreds of rejection letters I got, sending manuscripts off to publishers when I finished my first book when I was 18, 19 years old. I never had any doubt that this is what I would do. I didn't know if I'd make money at it, and it certainly took a long time before I did. I think when I finally landed a book deal, the editor was like, I know your background, and your background certainly isn't the background of most of the people that we publish. Did you ever think this would happen? And I said, well, yes and no. Part of me thought I'm throwing a Hail Mary, but I also thought, this is all I know how to do. I have no plan B. And there is a certain vitality to people who are that way. Would I want my child to be that way? No, I definitely wouldn't. I would prefer some security because I understand how difficult it is. And moreover, my immense gratitude is to the people who helped me and a recognition of how lucky I was. It was luck that made a lot of stuff happen. But at the same time, to be lucky, you have to be close. And to be close was I worked very hard. So, that's my own algebra with this kind of thing. But I owe a lot to that girl because I was very envious of her talent. I'm not an envious person. She was very gifted, and she had a voice, and she was just such a command. She was this very precocious person that I just thought if she appreciates something I'm doing, I don't think she's wrong. Even though I had doubts, I'm just going to allow myself to have permission to do this now. So I never worried about getting permission after that.
And that woman is Karen Russell.
Oh, I remember her first name. I don't remember her last name any longer.
Oh man, that's too bad. It would be good to probably just catch up and say like, hey, look, the product, all this great writing that I'm doing now is a product of you saying that I had talent.
Well, you know what? Part of me doesn't want to remember because the other thing that sticks to my mind about her was her saying, "My mother told me that you are really ugly and you'll never get a man because of how ugly you are, but you're very smart, so focus on that." I just thought, like, if my parents had said you're really ugly, or whatever. I just thought, what parent says that to a child? Good God! So I think that's why I don't want to remember her last name.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, all right, so kind of get into some like routine type stuff. What time do you typically wake up, and then what do the first 60 to 90 minutes of your day look like?
I get up the same time to write as I used to when I was boxing as an amateur, which is 4 o'clock in the morning, because I wanted to be like Mike Tyson and run across the city every morning, which I did for many years. And I've continued it by getting up at 4, trying not to smoke my first cigarette because I only smoke 3 cigarettes a day. And so I don't want to, I always have that terrible anxiety when I get up. So the first, my like armor and weapons against the anxiety is smoke a cigarette. And I have an old Cuban copper coffee maker where the water rises up through the coffee. It's a very sort of, it has a kind of orgiastic look to it, like you can watch it sort of fizzling over. So I find it always amusing and pleasurable. In Cuban cinema, very often they use it as like a quick cut when a girl is climaxing. They'll show coffee being made. And so I forever have had that association. So maybe I'm trying to think of creating some sort of environment of fertility in the apartment. I don't know. But yeah, coffee, a cigarette. I am surrounded by an avalanche of books I have on my desk that I use for research and notes everywhere. I'm a very messy person when it comes to writing, because from the chaos I like to extract new stuff, and also I think that desperation of, are you going to do it? That's never left me, that fear. I never feel like I can coast. I always feel like I have to work harder than anybody else. So,
well, it's a very athletic mentality that it's, you against someone in a lot of ways.
Well, I mean, I'm Dutch. I mean, I like Van Gogh. It's what I like about him is, how do you approach painting? Approach it like a farmer. Get out there at sunrise, go home at sundown, and I'm from peasant stock. So
do the work.
Do the work. I go outside. If I go outside for a cigarette, I mean, I can't smoke indoors anymore because my cat doesn't particularly appreciate it. Who do I see? I see guys cleaning gutters. I see people delivering pamphlets at 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, who are they complaining to about their grind? So my thing is, I'm writing for a living. I'm supporting myself, killing what I hunt as far as selling stories to places. And I've done some shit jobs. I've done some menial labor. This is a lot better than that.
So what is the nature of that hunt for you? Like, how do you track down your stories?
I mean, it's another thing where there's a lot of rejection pitching to editors. I think, like, for the first time in my life, I have a resume I'm not running away from in terms of where I've been published, that I can actually approach an editor and say, like, hey, I've been published in Esquire, and I turned down Random House to do a book deal, and that kind of stuff, thinking like that might, we can actually have a conversation where it's not that horrible, please consider me, that I could pull this off sort of thing. Like, that's gone. But it is still very much a challenge. The stuff that I like is to surprise people, and it's hard to sell editors on that, because what's the easiest thing to sell? Something that's familiar. And I don't want to do what's familiar. I want to do what's unusual or strange. Like, I meet a guy who's the second smartest man in the world in terms of IQ tests, and he's out of work. I want to do a whole profile of him trying to find a job.
Yeah.
Like, that's what really interests me, like unusual subcultural characters, and seeing how they're not that strange, that we can identify with a lot of things going on with them. That's tricky to sell to an editor, and there's definitely, for as many good people as there is in selling stories, there's a lot of the places feel like country clubs, and there's a exclusive kind of feel. So I've tried to always just focus on the positive with that, never take it personally. I try with any writers who ask me for contacts or that kind of thing to always help people out, because I've always been helped out by a lot of very established writers. I need to come from a positive place with what I'm doing rather than negativity or anger or trying to make something right. Those are impulses in me that just lead to bad results. So I try to sell people on things that really excite me, and I think this all comes down to seduction. And the number one ingredient in being a good seducer is being seduced, being a sucker. And I'm a sucker for these stories. Like, all these people that I'm writing about, I'm obsessed with them. I adore them. I'm enthralled. I'm their biggest fan. Like, I'm the one who wants to read this story more than anybody. And I'm just trying to find ways from that central feeling to, now, how can I make this for everybody else too? How can I really think about where they're coming from, so that for 20 minutes of their day, they're going to feel singularly like I've reached them with their problems and their concerns and eased their burden for a little bit of time. And that takes a lot of energy to try and think where people are coming from who are totally different from me. Like all writers, like, we're in a big bubble from how most people live. So I try to not live my life like a writer. I don't spend time with other writers. I don't like people like me who feel like flies on the wall of our own life. I like regular people who are not overly self-conscious,
Yeah.
I like meeting those people, which is probably why I really like boxers, because boxers are and Cubans, because both of those people, well, Cubans. I mean, we're speaking about a pretty broad breadth of different kinds of people. But self-consciousness has not been invented in Cuba yet. Like when people talk about being primitive, that's the only thing I've ever seen that's primitive in Cuba is just how natural they are, and that's nothing to say that they're so intelligent and complex, but there's just I think like Blixen said about animals, why we love animals so much is they live themselves to the full. You love your dog looking at you, he is himself to the full. And I think people, especially people in the United States, and even more so compounded tenfold in New York, that's hard. It's really, really hard in this society to be yourself to the full. Everything is encouraging the opposite, to conform and be like everybody else, or just, I don't know. So, yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, that's great. I wonder, you say you're 36 years old?
Yes.
Right now? So what advice would you give to you're not too far removed from it, but your 30-year-old self?
30?
Maybe you can even go a little bit farther back, say 25, maybe like 10, 11 years ago. What would you tell that Brin?
I'd say try to find another sport besides boxing.
I might tell myself that about horse racing.
Well, no, but horse racing can work. Boxing is just kind of, well, yeah, but then again, no barrier to entry was why I kind of went into boxing.
It's kind of like horse racing too. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't have any passport to get in, you have to find a country that doesn't require a passport.
Yeah.
So in that sense, no, I'm okay with 25-year-old Brin sticking with boxing. Cuba was a very hard sell, but the good thing was that Americans couldn't really go there, so very quickly people were willing to offer some deference to what I was doing that I don't think was justified or earned. It's just that I'd been writing about it so long, it was easier for like an ESPN magazine to be like, hey, you seem to have done some interesting stuff over here. We can't send our reporter over there, so maybe you could give him all your material for free, and we'll mention that he got some of his reporting from you. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing a Cuba issue, that means you need some stuff from Cuba, and you haven't been there. And I have been there. And I've talked to some pretty interesting people, some of which are not there anymore. So in that sense, the number came up on the roulette wheel. Like I'd chosen 00 or something, and for a number of years it was like, I don't know if you're writing about sports or this is anthropological. What this is just this weird kind of impressionistic thing you're doing. And then Cuba started getting more topical. It started getting more, we need something about this. So I had a lot of ammunition ready in the chamber to fire at that. And so when that opportunity happened after, I was giving a talk actually a couple days ago about this. I gave a lot of stories to Salon about Cuba for free. 4 stories that they didn't pay $1 for. And they'd say, well, you're going to get a lot more people looking at it. I hate the idea of giving work away for free or a part of that for other writers who work hard, who have rent to pay, who are not getting paid for what they're doing. Oh, it's good publicity, it's good exposure. I hate that kind of thinking. I have total antipathy towards the concept of internship. Fuck that. It's slave labor. Like, pay somebody. They have to pay. So, in my case, unfortunately, a Random House did knock on my door to publish it on the basis of it being published in Salon. So I did become that exception. Now, had I not been in Salon at all, had I been like, no, fuck you, I deserve to be paid for this, maybe I wouldn't have had any of the opportunities that I did by virtue of being published with where I went, ultimately, with Macmillan. I don't know. So, as I say, it was very fortunate and lucky. I made those choices to get it in there. I pushed it hard to get it in there. But it was just a gamble. So some of these gambles you get lucky with and some you don't. It's hard for me to imagine a parallel universe, even if I had 10 or 20, where I wouldn't have failed every time. I think I got very lucky in this one that I currently inhabit.
So when you think of the word successful, who comes to mind?
That's a good question. You mean currently successful?
Or it could be anyone. It could be your North Star, like someone who keeps you on track, dead or alive. That he's like, yeah, that's who I aim for. That's my true north.
I think a big guiding force for me of just being dazzled by his devotion to art and also being rewarded commercially was J.D. Salinger. And most people who cite J.D. Salinger love The Catcher in the Rye. That's my least favorite of his stuff. I was far more interested in the latter work he did that got more spiritual, where at first read I thought this guy has cracked up like everybody's saying. And then again coming back to it a couple years later and going, no, I think this guy's going somewhere completely new. And the idea that he's going somewhere new where he could fall back on doing a sequel to The Catcher in the Rye is very interesting and very inspiring, that he is going somewhere alone, where talk about not having mentors, not having guiding star. He's going off on his own. He's swimming in deep waters. And this guy doesn't have to. He can publish in the New Yorker whenever he wants. He can publish anything he wants. Critic proof as well. I mean, how many writers are critic proof?
Yeah.
Very, very few. And yet he's going, eventually just saying, why do we need to be published at all? Why do I need this? I don't. I want to write every day, but I don't need to be published. That was all thrilling to me. And I guess there were parallels with Bobby Fischer, kind of. Fischer seems to me like a J.D. Salinger character, almost more than a real person. And I know about all the anti-Semitic lunacy that went on later, but I just meant earlier on, creating, you go through some of that guy's games. I was a big chess player as a kid. I hustled chess for a while, not terribly well, but I tried. And he was an artist himself. You go back to some of his games. Some of them are just, like Jose Tomas, except it's on a chessboard. I was very interested by people who sort of dared to be something extraordinary in terms of allowing themselves to be who they were. Now, I'm not advocating what Bobby Fischer became, denouncing the United States during 9/11 and his Jewish heritage, but I like people who go that way. I've always been interested in them. I was always of the philosophy that if I can pay my rent and have the freedom, my only real luxury is that I like to eat out. Now, I don't like to eat out at nice places, but I don't want a car. I don't want to own an apartment. I'm not a materialistic person. I'm not in New York because I can't live anywhere else. I was here because it was very useful in that my subjects were always coming through New York. That was not true in Vancouver. Any person in the world who's doing things that the world cares about, if you get them on the phone, within 6 months they're passing through New York.
Right.
So then I was like, all I have to do is hijack them. All I have to do is just make sure that they'll say, yes, I can give you 2 hours.
Yep.
So then I need to find places that would be willing to pay me. Finding an Amazon saying, well, if you can get Errol Morris, boom, okay, I can try to do that. And, making yes the easiest decision for people. I think it comes back to, Gay Talese said a very clever thing with subjects that, like, interviewing people is like going on a date. And one thing that I, early on, I didn't have a lot of confidence in dating, but I was always like, getting rejected by a homely girl feels just as bad as getting rejected by a girl you're madly in love with. So why not just go for the ones you're madly in love with?
Yeah.
Go for the ones who are out of your league. So that is like, that's the kind of girl that I want. One who's out of my league, and that's the kind of character that I want. One who's way out of my league. What business do I have, meeting this guy? And then finding them and making something happen from it. And that gives me my my excitement and my thrill. I'm not doing drugs. I'm not drinking, any of those things. My drug is that. So I would like to do more of that and get more access to those people and then share those stories with people, hopefully, so that I can hear even better stories from other people. That's success to me, because, as I say, the access is, for me, the thrill.
That's wonderful. I think that's a perfect place to end our conversation, Brin. That's a good piece of advice and a great definition of success, I think. One last thing, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm on Twitter at Brinicio, Brinicio, and the Domino Diaries and some of these interviews with Errol Morris and Mike Tyson are also on Amazon, the Kindle single series. And there will be a story, I think on Wednesday, about Scott Norwood and Buffalo and the Buffalo Bills 25 years after the missed kick.
Fantastic. And I'll be sure to link up all that stuff in the show notes for this so people can find your work and get, if they're not acquainted with your work, get acquainted with it, and if they already are, then they can dig in with the X-ray goggles and read the stuff with closer eyes, because it's well worth multiple reads, not just one. So in any case, thank you so much for carving out time of your day here, Brin, and maybe we can do another part 2 down the road when you've got some more work coming out.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, and take care.
Thanks, Brendan. Take care.
You got it.
Bye-bye.
That's all, folks. Thanks again for listening. My 2 calls to action are: share this with someone you think will enjoy it, and subscribe to my email list at BrendanO'Mara.com. That's it. Until next time on #CNF.